Hello and welcome to OnPoint. I'm Monica Trauzzi. With me today is former Senator Evan Bayh, a co-chair of the Nuclear Matters campaign. Senator, thank you for coming on the show.
Good to be with you, Monica.
Senator, you have years of experience on a variety of energy issues. You were a member of the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee when you were in Congress. Why have you decided to put your efforts behind nuclear energy right now?
Because it's going to be very important going forward, Monica, to some things I care deeply about. Number one, the vitality of our economy. Number two, how we're going to deal with the issue of climate change and CO2 emissions. And number three, the reliability and stability of our energy supply for consumers across our country and across my state. It touches upon all of that. I'll just give you 2 data points. Nuclear constitutes 20% of the electricity we generate in the country, so 1/5, very substantial. Many people aren't aware of that. It's also 62% of the carbon-free electricity that we generate. You have wind, solar, geothermal, that sort of thing. But nuclear is 62%. So if you're going to be serious about our economy, you're going to be serious about climate change and CO2, you've got to be focused on the vitality of the nuclear industry.
But it's also facing some serious economic challenges right now. How do you pull the industry out of that?
Well, that's a great question. But first, we're starting with an information campaign to just let the public know. You may be a lot like me. I flip the light switch in the morning. I don't give a whole lot of thought to where it comes from until it doesn't go on. We've got to let people know the role that nuclear plays and then get into the perfect storm of factors: sluggish demand, the incredibly cheap natural gas that we have for the time being. Who knows how long that will last? And then some things to do with the legislative regulatory arena that mean that the playing field is not entirely level. So first informational, then we get into sometime later what to do about all this.
All right, so let's talk about the timing of the Nuclear Matters campaign. It comes at a time when we're seeing the nuclear industry put pressure on Congress to reconsider an extension of the wind energy production tax credit. Is that what's happening here? You were trying to sort of push the conversation in that direction to rethink what to do on wind?
That may be going on, Monica, but it's not a part of Nuclear Matters that I and former Senator Gregg are involved with. This is about, that's an issue. That may be part of the conversation at some point. But today, there have already been 2 nuclear plants closed, one in Vermont, one in Wisconsin. And we're sort of sleepwalking into the future. If nothing is done, these plants will continue to close. There will be some significant consequences as a result of that, some of them adverse. It's important that the American people understand that so we can make an informed decision.
So why are they closing?
And by the way, just one other data point. In Germany, where they made a decision to start cutting back on nuclear generation, they have seen their CO2 emissions rise substantially in Germany at a time when we're trying to grapple with global warming.
Why are these plants closing? Is it because the playing field is not level? Is it because the technology isn't up to speed? What's the key driver there?
Well, there are a variety of factors. Some of them macroeconomic. We're just at a period of sluggish demand right now because the economy has not been strong. Some of it has to deal with regional, local factors, the transmission capabilities. The price of natural gas has been incredibly low. Now it's coming back some, and who knows how long that will last. That's another important point. It makes sense to not have our energy generation too concentrated in just a few areas because you never know what's going to happen. So it makes sense to have it be a little more diverse. As I said, nuclear is 1/5. That's good. But the final factor is that because of some policy decisions, you have some generators that are actually able to sell electricity at below the cost of production. And so if that's setting the market price at below their cost of production, it makes it difficult to compete with that for more other types of generation that don't have that advantage. So nuclear brings to the table reliability, even back during, was it polar vortex or snowmageddon? I can't remember. I think this time was the polar vortex.
This year was the vortex.
Yeah, when other types of generation were not as reliable, nuclear was right in there going 24/7. So it's very reliable. It's entirely domestic. It's entirely carbon-free. And yet the market price does not price in some of those attributes that have a real value. It's what the economists would call an externality here. There are some benefits that nuclear brings to the table that are real, but that the spot market doesn't price in, and therefore the nuclear generation doesn't get the benefit of that.
I recently interviewed Exelon's Bill Von Haney, and Exelon is facing a particularly challenging environment right now with several reactors that are considered to be economically challenged. What is Exelon's role in the Nuclear Matters campaign?
Exelon is funding the first year of the campaign. We're hoping to broaden that to several other stakeholders going forward. So Exelon is paying for the first year, but beyond that, we're hoping to broaden it to other people who care about this issue.
Is the nuclear industry's downswing simply a factor of markets at work?
Well, it's a factor of several things. I touched upon them. Some longer term, sluggish rate of the economy, some dealing with transmission. But you have currently, it depends. In regulated markets, it's not so big an issue. In deregulated markets, you have spot prices being set, in some cases, by generators that sell below cost, and that makes it very difficult for long-term other generators to compete with that. So we need to have a long-term energy strategy in this country that's not set quite so much by the vagaries of spot market pricing.
The Center for Climate and Energy Solutions, Eileen Clausen, recently said the best way to advance low-carbon solutions, including nuclear power, is to put a price on carbon. Would you agree with that?
That would certainly be one way. We don't have that today, as you know, and I think looking at it realistically, the chances of Congress enacting such a thing are not high. And so we need to look at what the potential solutions are that are feasible and focus on those. So that would certainly be one way. And the fact that nuclear is entirely carbon-free, that benefit that it brings to the table is not factored into the pricing currently.
So in the absence of congressional action, EPA is moving forward with its authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. How do you believe nuclear energy could fit into those efforts?
Well, that's difficult to say without knowing what they're doing. But the fact that nuclear is carbon-free in a more highly regulated environment might be something that would work to its advantage. But there will still be other producers out there that have the legislated benefits of being subsidized. And that's obviously difficult to deal with when you're not.
You mentioned a big part of what Nuclear Matters is trying to do is sort of educating the public, members of Congress. What do you believe the biggest piece of misinformation is within Congress on nuclear energy?
Well, I think there would be several. First, and there's some of the leading climate scientists are starting to come out and speak to this, even those who've been very aggressive about, look, we have to deal with the CO2 emission issue, we need to deal with it much sooner rather than later. Your average citizen, if you ask them, yeah, we need to deal with climate change and carbon, doesn't really think, oh, nuclear, that's right, no carbon emissions whatsoever. So I think we got to make that connection that if you want to be serious about climate change and CO2, in today's, no pun intended, today's environment, nuclear has to be part of the solution. Wind, solar, hydro, all great. But they're really not going to get up to scale in the near or intermediate term to compensate for taking nuclear offline. That just, in wishful thinking you might get there. In the real world, that's just not practical. So if you care about climate change, you have to care about the vitality of nuclear generation. And it is threatened with 2 plants already having closed down. And we could just wander into the same sort of situation Germany finds itself in, which paying more for our electricity and having carbon emissions going up. That's not a future we want.
All right, Senator, we'll end it there. Thank you for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Monica.
And thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.